Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Sophie Auffrey de la place Ressurgo, le musée de Moncton. Puis on se trouve aujourd'hui au Botsford Station, mais dans l'espace la Station Workspace, avec Mylène Després et Dan Gillis.
Salut, hello.
Fait que, parlez-moi un peu de votre projet du Botsford Station et de la station. C'était quoi le concept? Vous êtes arrivé ici, c'était un bâtiment qui existait déjà, puis vous aviez une vision pour ça.
It's a bit of a story, or maybe a long story.
No? It's all right.
It's all right. It's all right. I guess the story of the building is longer, but we found the building 12 years ago. Now, Mylène helps me with the math because I am losing track of
12
time.
years ago last month.
Yeah, 12 years ago last month. And so the story goes, I was actually just moving back home from Montreal. And so I was living in the north end of Montreal in the Mylène, sort of as, during the early 2000s when all of these old factories in the north end of the city were being sort of restored and repurposed and turned into creative lofts and studios, and we had an opportunity to go to events and parties and see the coolest spaces that I had seen, and so how people were starting to reimagine buildings in where there was lots of old buildings like this.
Fait qu'il y a beaucoup de potentiel. Tu étais inspiré par ce qui se passait à Montréal.
Yeah, and in other cities, sort of this resurgence of sort of the artists and creative community really moving into old spaces and repurposing them. And there was this magical formula of inexpensive space that made sense for artists to move in, but then in time they became these really sustainable projects that all started from quite a creative place. And so I was in that mindset moving back home to Moncton. It was in 2009. And so I was actually walking the streets and being like, what actually exists here? And so my perspective on leaving Moncton was like, this place is boring, there's nothing happening here. And so I went sort of searching for it outside of Moncton, but it was only moving back home that changed that whole perspective of like, oh, it actually just hasn't happened here yet. And so Aberdeen was fully established and thriving, and that was probably the best project at the time to look up to. But there's actually only a few properties like that left in Moncton. So there was the Higgins block, and there was the subway block, and there was very few old historic buildings that actually hadn't been repurposed, saved, or torn down. And this was one of them. So we actually came in and found this building. It was covered with white vinyl siding. All 92 windows were boarded up, and we didn't even know it was a brick building. We had to look underneath the siding that came from the Osco siding factory, Moncton heritage, right? And just to know that it was a brick building, and even when we came in, it was hard to see its potential. But that's where we started spending time here. We came up with a really creative approach to getting into it and getting the project started. But it was, at that time, full of stuff.
Right,
Some of the stuff that's still in this building now.
Yeah.
Parlez-moi un petit peu de l'histoire du bâtiment comme tel. C'était une factory pour des chapeaux. C'est quoi l'histoire?
That's it. We didn't know that originally, but when we bought the building, the museum actually provided us with all of the archives of all of the articles. There wasn't a single picture of the building that was built back started in 1910 to 1913 by Maritime Cap. So it was a hat factory, like men's hats and caps were made in here. We have done the whole mercury check, don't worry. But on that, it was, at the time it was considered like an economic development success story. Because they actually relocated 70 families from Truro to Moncton, and at that time, 70 families, I think 70 families would still be significant today. And so it was all 70 families that lived in and around the building that were working here as they were producing hats. And Maritime Hat and Cap was here for, I believe, almost 36 years. Okay. So they were the start of this project. They built it over 3 years for for $10,000. People make fun of me because it took us 3 years just to empty the building once we found it. And they're like, really? It took them 3 years to build it, and it took you 3 years just to empty it out?
Yeah.
So it puts it in perspective.
Oui.
That's wild what you can do to a building in 100 years.
Yeah, but that's how it started,
Bring
and it was all because Moncton decided to put natural gas down what was called Botsford Street extension at the time, because Botsford Street stopped here down at the marsh, before the marsh, and so this was just a little street that popped up because of the factories, and natural gas was put down, so we had an inexpensive energy source from Hillsborough, that we were bringing here to power these kind of factories, 110 years ago.
Et c'est fascinant.
Yeah, so we found the building about 100 years later, and we played with that at the time. We were like, this is, sort of, we want this to be a part of helping to bring people and to keep people in Moncton. We want to bring a space, a creative space where people can really feel like they've got an environment to whether work their project or, to connect with others and to feel like they're a part of the community here in Moncton. And so it became that over the years, and lots of people who were like, yeah, I'm here because, or I stayed because, and so we did celebrate that, as we celebrated the 100th anniversary for Maritime Cap, and we did it in a way where we had all the volunteers and everyone that had helped with that project. We got together and we did a big celebration.
D'accord. Puis c'est ça, quand tu l'as trouvé,
10
justement,
000
c'était rempli de meubles.
Yeah, it was a business called Canada Clearance.
D'accord.
And the man who was in here before we founded the previous 30 years had been buying and selling used office furniture
And boat supplies at one point.
Surplus. Let's just say anything that is a very, very entrepreneurial, very enterprising man who we actually learned a lot from, but he would buy and sell, and this building became the catch-all of all the stuff that didn't sell over a good part of his career. And so a part of that, stepping into it, we saw its potential. We're like, wow, this is a post and beam building, and all the flooring assembly is 2x4s, turned on end. It's concrete brick.
C'était quand même solide là, comme bâtiment.
It was like, of all the buildings, the subway block was structurally challenged. Like all the other properties require them a lot more to get started, but the structure here was the most solid that we had found.
It just looked like it did, so it took very creative minds to see its potential.
Oui, j'imagine quand même. Là, faut que t'enlèves des couches puis que tu vois plus loin. Ben toi, justement, t'as ouvert une entreprise ici, dans la station Botsford.
Voilà.
Qui s'appelle la Station Workspace.
C'est bien ça.
Parle-nous de ça, puis c'est quoi? As-tu eu des défis par rapport à t'établir dans un édifice qui existait déjà? Ou?
Absolument.
Oui.
Donc, quand on a commencé à jaser, moi puis Dan, c'est une amie qui nous a mis en contact, Mylène Després, que j'y ai dit c'était quoi mes projets, puis elle m'a dit tu devrais parler à Dan, je pense que vous seriez vraiment alignés dans ce que vous voulez faire. Il y a un plein étage de la Botsford Station qui n'est pas encore développé. Puis là, moi à l'époque j'avais mon business déjà, la station support. Puis j'étais en train de faire des recherches pour ouvrir la Station Workspace parce que il y avait beaucoup d'entrepreneurs, beaucoup de personnes, travailleurs autonomes, travailleurs des organismes à but non lucratif qui me parlaient, qui se sentaient en silo, chacun de leur coin, chacun dans leur petit café. Puis que ça fait que moi je voulais vraiment créer un espace de communauté pour rassembler tout le monde puis faciliter la collaboration entre tout ce beau monde-là qui allait faire une différence dans notre communauté. Donc, je suis venue parler jaser avec Dan, puis on a vu que nos visions
One thing
étaient...
led to another.
Oh, yeah. Tu sais, pas juste que la Botsford Station puis la station, parce que ma business s'appelle la station, parce qu'apparemment, ma maison aurait été une vieille gare.
Mais ça n'avait pas de lien avec...
Non,
c'était juste une adonnance.
c'était une adonnance. Puis moi et Dan, on se connaît depuis vraiment longtemps. À un moment donné, quand il cherchait justement pour ces buildings, je l'ai vu comme c'était sur le bord d'un chemin, puis il regardait une building, puis je me disais, qu'est-ce que tu fais?
What are you doing?
What's up, Dan? Il était, je regarde juste. Tu sais, il chopait pour ce site. Ça fait que c'est ça. Ça fait que après une meeting initiale, on a décidé de sauter les deux à travailler ensemble parce que nos visions pour notre communauté, pour la ville de Moncton et pour notre province se ressemblaient beaucoup. On avait vraiment beaucoup des mêmes genres de choses.
Les valeurs s'alignaient très bien.
C'est ça.
Ouais.
À la base, quand on a commencé à parler de créer la Station Workspace, Dan a le contenant, moi j'ai le contenu. C'est comme une manière qu'on a trouvé d'identifier nos rôles. Ça fait que, mais on travaille vraiment en partenariat tous les jours à essayer de faire voir l'espace fleurir. Puis à la base, quand on a commencé à jaser, la Station Workspace était supposée être au 3e étage. Il n'avait pas encore eu de rénovation. Donc, en 2010, Dan a acheté la bâtisse. Ça a pris 2 ans de changer les fenêtres, à même vider le contenu.
Qui était un gros projet,
un big endeavor. Puis, à travers de ça, il a fait quelques parties qui restent dans le souvenir collectif.
We brought life to the space.
Oui, c'est ça.
Ces événements qui restent dans l'espace, dans la mémoire collective de Moncton.
Tu parles de contenant, c'est un bâtiment qui a beaucoup de potentiel pour différents types de projets et d'entreprises. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses qui sont en train que vous travaillez dessus? Il y a une boutique au premier étage.
C'est ça. Puis là, c'est ça. En 2012, la boutique, ils ont fait parce que la bâtisse a été rénovée un étage à la fois. Donc, 2010 à 2012, ça a pris à vider. Puis, en 2012, le passage, qui est une institution de Moncton, on s'entend, qui est ouvert en 1982, je pense.
Yeah, it's their 40th anniversary. The passage.
Oh my God!
So this is the year I was born, but their 7th location.
Okay.
And so Pierre's big thing is we met Pierre through those events. I met his daughter through the events, and we met Pierre, and we were actually having a potluck. Pierre had just gotten to notice that they were going to tear down the Highfield Square, where so that night he was here, and we were having a big community potluck, and we actually saw the moment that Pierre was looking around, and he said, I could move my store here, and that was the first real tenant, that we had in the building. Prior to that, it was more like an artist-run center, and when Passage moved in, everyone was like, really?
Yeah,
Passage is going to move into that abandoned hat factory, and Pierre really took a chance in moving and relocating his business here. But over those 40 years, he built such a loyal clientele that was really willing to follow the Passage and follow the business wherever it went. So that was the first big thing, and then Pierre actually invested into building the staircases to the upper floors. Wow. And that was a huge thing, because prior to that, we actually didn't have access to the 2nd and 3rd floor as related to fire safety and building code. And so the project, when we say community-based project, it's really been based on contribution. Everyone, Mylène and Pierre and everyone that is a part of it has really contributed something of like great significance that has helped it sort of really come together. And so it is a true collaborative project in that way. So it's not really just like tenants, all the people that are here
are community.
And
really a part
that
of
is
the
even
project.
true for the 2nd floor, which when I was planning on opening La Station on the 3rd floor, is because the 2nd floor was already occupied. We had the Botsford Bros in the front production company. Then we had Porpoise, a local tech company, founded by Dan here.
And alongside.
And puis alongside, puis Porpoise ont à leur tour investi dans les finances du 2e de l'espace. Puis à un moment donné, avec nos discussions de ce qu'on voulait faire au 3e, on s'entend que les fit-ups d'un plein étage,
they turned out to be extensive.
We
found out we needed to replace the roof.
C'est
fallait changer le toit. C'est ça. Donc, moi, j'avais maintenant plus assez le dos large pour me permettre de aller de l'avant avec le 3e étage. Mais quelques mois plus tard, j'ai eu l'opportunité parce que le headquarters de Porpoise déménageait justement à Montréal. Puis là, alongside, eux, ils voulaient leurs propres espaces, ils allaient grandir, ils étaient en train, sur la veille, de faire un pivot eux-mêmes. Puis eux sont déménagés dans la Brown Holder Building, qui est très drôle parce qu'ils ont commencé à, c'est pas le Higgins Block? Non, pas Higgins Block, ils ont commencé
Aberdeen.
non, Titan Bore.
Really?
Yeah, above Titan Bore, I think.
No, when I met them, they were at Aberdeen.
Okay.
From Aberdeen, they were Mike Roy's animation studio.
Okay.
And then from there to
Ici,
Botsford
c'est
Station,
ça.
from Botsford Station to Brown's
It's
Holder.
all historic buildings.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
next, they're probably going to be working at the Ford truck dealership. You know, that's probably next.
Taylor Ford.
Taylor Ford.
Now, alongside, aka previously known as.
Like, where do they go from here? Café Clémentine. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to commend you guys, like the Highfield Square, l'exemple. Ça, c'est justement comme vous avez pris l'opportunité de prendre un bâtiment qui existait déjà pour le réadapter. Puis c'est ce qu'on trouve vraiment essentiel, surtout du côté environnemental.
Absolument.
Fait que vous avez eu beaucoup de chance de recyclage, de réutiliser des matériaux. Prends-moi un peu de ça, là. Il y avait des projets.
We had to.
Ouais.
Because we had the opportunity to buy the building in a very creative way. So the previous owner actually held the mortgage for us to allow us to get started while we were helping to clear out all of his stuff.
Okay.
So we were quite young, as you know, when we were getting into this entrepreneurial project. I think we were 27 when the project started, and we had very limited resources, let's say. So when we bought the building, a creative approach to buying it and a partnership where we actually helped work with the previous owner to empty his stuff and to put it in storage, and there was a lot of dumpsters, unfortunately, but we actually had a youth program here called Youth Built. We worked with 50 youth who had actually dropped out of high school that wanted to get back into finishing their GED, and we became a placement for them, and we had 50 boys, like grade 9 to 12, that came to work with us over those 2 years that actually helped empty. So it's like full-time 10 high school guys at a time, it was all guys at that time, that helped unload the building. And so it's just that kind of approach to sort of getting scrappy or resourceful to really figuring out each step. But the cool thing is that the building was full of used office furniture. So even this table was here, and this wasn't placed, it's just everything, you know, for the most part was here.
Avec la table.
Pretty sure that
and
credenza as well.
the credenza was here, and there's some old school record players. But this was put together by the youth build crew. Like they built this 10 years ago.
Parle-moi des fenêtres. T'as mentionné.
Yeah, because the issue was like so Pial built the staircases, but then we didn't have proper fire exits. So we didn't have fire-rated doors, we didn't have emergency signs, we didn't have all of the things that you need to make sure the building is legit and safe. So we actually got a lead from a friend who was like, hey, I hear they're going to tear down the Vanier school. And they found asbestos, and there's lots of good stuff in the school. You should go down and check it out. And so that day we went down, like we were just like, let's go. Like we walked over the Vanier, probably crossed the tracks, walked over the Vanier, knocked on the door, met the demolition contractor, and we bought 18 fire-rated doors, you know, that were actually at the school. And we went around with a little green tape, and it was like, I think for $1,000, like he sold us 18 fire-rated doors. And while we were there, we had like our scavenger hats on. We're like, wow, like look at all of the resources in this old school. And we measured the windows. And because at the time we had 92 windows that were all boarded up. Like it was...
Ici, à la station.
Ici, ouais, la Botsford Station, ouais.
All of these were boarded up. And so we measured, and the windows actually fit perfectly.
For here.
They were like an inch short. They were sort of all the way around, and so we made an offer to the demolition contractor. We're like, "Would you sell us some windows?" And he said, "Well, make me an offer." And so we said, "Well, how about $3,500?" Because that was all the money we had from probably an event that we did the weekend before.
That's right.
And he's like, "You've got 2 weeks." He said, "Like, go get as many as you can." And so then we were like, "Oh, okay." So we resourced and figured out how to go get windows out of the school and back to the building.
You got 82?
We got 80. We were able to bring 80 back, 80 home. So over those 2 weeks.
Puis c'est un très bel exemple parce que l'école Vanier, sometimes you can't save them all, right?
Non,
so
c'est ça.
It's going to go down. Mais vous avez trouvé une manière de réutiliser certains matériaux.
Exactement. Puis
And
j'aime
there's so
tellement,
much there. Yeah.
j'adore voir la réaction des gens quand ils rentrent ici, puis on leur parle des choses, puis là tu les vois regarder les fenêtres, puis ils filent, tu les vois qui sont comme j'ai vu ces fenêtres, comme c'est familier ça.
Oh, wow.
C'est comme les fenêtres viennent de l'école Vanier. Ça, je croyais que j'avais déjà vu ces
I know
fenêtres dans
those
mon
windows.
école.
And then the old schoolhouse lights came from St. James Gate Bar.
St. James Gate Bar, quand ils ont rénové. Donc, c'est ça, les lumières viennent aussi du St. James Gate. Quand ils ont rénové, Dan puis sa crew ont tout été les chercher.
The old stair treads
Oui.
from Aberdeen.
C'est ça.
The old chalkboards from Aberdeen. When they did the renovation at Aberdeen,
Oui, il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on...
there was a tractor trailer load of stuff from Aberdeen that was actually brought down the road and parked out behind Botsford. Behind our building. So we just got to go, and all these Aberdeen loose ends that were, instead of being thrown out, we got to repurpose them and use them here.
Sur nos comptoirs de cuisine au deuxième étage sont faits avec les tableaux d'ardoise de l'école Aberdeen.
Ça, c'est spécial. Du côté patrimonial et culturel de la ville de
C'est ça.
Moncton, tu sais, je trouve ça vraiment...
Puis même la chaise
génial.
que tu es assis dessus,
Oui.
c'est une des chaises originales du restaurant Galactus.
Ah,
Quand
d'accord.
eux ont updaté leur chaise, voilà. On a des tables là-bas, celle-là vient du Pastali. On a d'autres tables du Galactus aussi. On a des chaises de la Maison Mère, Notre-Dame d'Acadie. Non,
C'est presque comme un musée, Notre-Dame.
oui, dessus la King, de la Maison Mère, comme les chaises d'école. Là. On a une belle dizaine de ceux-là. On a même, il y a un espace de travail collaboratif, un coworking comme ici, qui a fermé l'année dernière. C'était le Impactory. La bâtisse qui était dedans s'est fait vendre. Puis les propriétaires, parce que à Montréal, étaient comme, c'est fine, on va juste cut our losses, right? So, moi et Dan, moi j'ai su ça le matin. Le matin même, j'étais comme, on peut-tu find out qui est in charge des meubles? On a tout acheté les meubles. Puis le beanbag chair que je me battais avec tantôt, c'était là, la table là.
Bravo.
Plein d'affaires, de juste repurpose. C'est vraiment ça, le but dans toutes nos affaires, c'est de redonner de la vie à des vieux objets ou des choses qui sont encore utiles.
Ouais, je sais.
Puis, du point de vue écologique, c'est mieux d'un point de vue écologique, c'est aussi parce que ça donne une... Moi, je trouve que c'est ça qui kind of aide à faire que l'énergie, c'est dedans.
Oui,
Et
c'est
dans le
chaleureux.
fun, c'est chaleureux,
Oui, l'ambiance est belle.
c'est plein de choses qui le fait filer nice.
Yeah.
Ouais.
And it was a necessity.
Ouais.
You know, so it was the mix of like
Yeah.
it's also what we had to do. So for us, and we're kind of back at that point, right? Let's just say society-wide with the cost of building materials and access to resources and with supply chain issues and just how we're building things now, I think we just need to be thinking
Oui,
Dans l'économie circulaire.
Yeah.
exactement, l'économie circulaire.
C'est
C'est
ça.
ça.
C'est le fun que
En
vous aviez
importance.
déjà cette perspective-là pour continuer. Like you already had a few years.
Yeah. Puis en 2020, on a finalement pu changer le toit.
Ah
Quand
oui,
on a
ok.
formé, quand on a dû fermer nos portes pendant 9 semaines à cause de quand l'état d'urgence a été déclaré, on venait tout juste de recevoir les permis de construction pour le changement du toit. Puis le financement venait juste de passer. Ça fait qu'on en a profité pour juste fermer. On a vu ça comme
It was the
c'était
right
une
time.
opportunité. Ouais, c'était le bon moment. On a pris ça comme l'opportunité
It
de
was
le faire.
messy. It was
Oh,
we like peeled off 10 tons of tar and gravel
Wow.
from the roof. Like the roof had never been redone, just like re-tarred.
Since like 40 some years
Well,
ago?
probably
Since
100 years.
100
Like it was the
years,
original
yeah.
roof of the hat factory. So
Wow.
Maritime
oui.
Hat and Cap 1913 or 1910 they would have built this roof.
Yeah.
It was never replaced, and it was the part that we didn't want to look at. Like for the 10 years, it was like we were scared.
Ça
because
l'extérieur,
there
ça
was a
venait.
drop ceiling, and it was kind of covering what we didn't want to see, and then
under the drop ceiling was a tarp.
well, the tarp, we had a tarp that collected a steady drip for about a decade. And then when we actually had to bail out the building when it was raining.
Yeah.
But the roof itself, it's the way they laminated the beams, is that they didn't laminate and glue the beams in the ways we would today, sort of vertically. They laminated them horizontally, which meant that the beams themselves had all sagged, and even though they stayed there for 110 years, sort of undisturbed, the roof didn't collapse. When you bring in sort of structural engineers to look at it, they'd be like we're never going to permit you to build a rooftop garden on this, which is a part of our vision. And so
That's right.
J'allais vous demander si vous aviez d'autres projets à venir. En fait, ça, c'est
Toujours.
vraiment fun.
Yeah, there's more projects.
Toujours.
And we're like, what's happening with Moncton High? You know?
That's right.
Oh.
Potential.
What's happening all around.
No, so there's no end of projects.
No, and there's no end
vision.
of crazy ideas. I remember when I was first quand je suis en train d'amener des gens pour leur montrer mes plans pour la station au 3e étage, tout le monde me regardait comme OK.
Ça peut être décourageant.
Sûr?
T'arrives dans un édifice ou un bâtiment plus ancien, mais faut
nous autres,
que la vision.
Nous autres, on était inspirés quand on montait en haut, puis ça nous inspirait. Puis il y avait des gens qui venaient avec nous autres, puis ça leur faisait peur. Mais c'est correct, ça. C'est correct.
And we were delusional. Like it was required to actually take on something like this. But my closest mentors, like the people I looked up to, they're like, you're crazy. You're just straight up crazy.
Same.
You know, like this will probably never work. And I was like, okay, thank you for that. And you know, maybe we'll prove you wrong. But it was that kind of project. It didn't actually make sense, which is why it wasn't happening.
Doesn't.
And the building was, like from a real estate perspective, the building was upside down, which meant that it would cost more to restore and renovate this building than you could actually make back from it.
But that's today's perspective on everything.
It's not in commercial real estate, not in like when people are evaluating what buildings to take on and to restore and save, right? So this building is upside down. So no investor would come in and just say, I'm going to invest in this building to make money. Like it wouldn't happen. So we had to come in with a different form of currency. We're not just doing this to make money, we're doing this to build community, and the thing that we have is time. We have time, and then we'll gather the resources to make this happen. Like 12 years later now, we're still talking about it in crazy dreams, but so it wasn't an investment project. And so with buildings like this,
it was an investment in our community, though.
Yeah. For sure, different currency.
That's right.
And then the Higgins block, that project, like that was saved. But now the subway block, like not savable? Question mark. So that's kind of the challenge. Is like, what do you do with a project like that that's so significant, that has so much like heritage value, right? But has so many structural, issues. Like, how do you go in and do that?
C'est ça. Et puis, c'est pas tout le monde qui est prêt à investir du temps puis des ressources dans un projet comme tel. Puis, ça se peut que justement, c'est à cause de ça que cet édifice ici ou ce bâtiment ici il était disponible pour votre projet puis votre vision. C'est comme, ça peut tomber juste dans le bon temps, puis les bonnes personnes, puis...
And it just needed a different approach, which is what the subway block needs. It needs a different approach, a different vision, a different perception and agreement. Okay, what is the value that we're trying to get out of this? Which is then how a group could approach saving a project like that.
Fait qu'il y a beaucoup de bâtiments à Moncton qui pourraient justement profiter d'un peu de TLC, comme un projet comme ceci, puis on en a nommé quelques-uns.
Ils sont pas obligés de tout changer.
C'est ça. Puis
ils sont pas obligés de tout devenir des condos, non?
Ben justement, il y a différentes options. Réadapter un bâtiment, c'est vraiment une belle approche, puis on vous félicite.
Merci.
Pour le super beau projet, pour l'exemple qu'on peut offrir aux gens de Moncton.
Même jusqu'à quand on a changé le toit, mais après ça, en 2021, on a fait la rénovation du 3e étage. Puis, pour ça, on avait notre project manager, Bert, mais on a aussi fait un partenariat avec le département de génie de l'Université de Moncton.
Oui, c'est vrai.
C'est ça. On a été choisi comme projet de fin de bac à un groupe de 4 ou 5 étudiants en génie maintenant ingénieur, pour nous aider à transformer la rénovation, faire de la rénovation la plus écologique et sustainable possible. Donc, de l'approvisionnement des matériaux plus locaux, à le choix des matériaux qu'on a utilisés, puis tout ça. Puis le projet a été amené à la compétition canadienne d'ingénierie en 2021, puis ils ont gagné 2e place, ces étudiants-là.
Incroyable! Oui, ça c'est vraiment impressionnant. Puis encore une fois, un bel exemple de collaboration, comme c'est pas juste une personne qui rentre puis qui fait tout, c'est vraiment la communauté qui s'implique.
There's literally been hundreds of people that have been a part of this project.
Yeah.
Like several hundred people.
C'est ça. C'est nous
now
autres
that have
sensibles,
contributed in different ways from
c'est nous
clearing
autres
the space
sensibles
to...
aujourd'hui, mais tout le monde avait un rôle vraiment vital au projet.
So in terms of vision, next is like, as Mylène was saying, we're working with like now an incredible team of architects and builders to sort of envision what's next. And for us, we're developing a vision now for a rooftop garden on top of this new roof. And it's not really just a rooftop garden, but really a space for people to be and for us to have outside
in partnership
space.
with a lot of a few not-for-profits in our city that are, like Garden Cities Project, and tous des gens de différents. Ben c'est ça, c'est la station, c'est comme la vision que tu penses à une gare de train, les trains arrivent ici. Nous autres, comme moi, ma vision pour la station support, c'était on travaille sur les engins, je travaille sur les engins des organismes.
J'aime le lien historique avec
c'est ça, exactement. Puis on est à côté de la station, puis là la station Workspace, c'est avec la vision qu'on travaille sur les engins de notre communauté. Ça fait que tout le monde ici sont partie prenante de la communauté puis veulent faire une différence de quelconque manière, que ce soit au point de vue de leur emploi ou juste personnel ou peu importe. C'est vraiment...
And then for us, the last project, like one of the last projects outside of designing sort of our vision for the rooftop garden is we've really been inside out. So we've worked on the restoration of the inside of the building before moving to the outside, but now we're at the point now where we really need to restore, and we're in sort of preservation mode now. So we took off the white vinyl siding, we've exposed the concrete brick that was underneath it. The brick itself is quite porous, so when it rains, the building gets wet, and these cracks are, have been forming over the years, and so we're asking ourselves what the best approach would be for the preservation and the restoration of the building, the outside itself.
Une espèce avec le point de vue de où est-ce qu'on veut s'en aller avec les certifications qu'on veut avec pour le bâtiment, on vise à démocratiser le sustainable renovation vraiment avec les LEED certifications, puis living building certifications, qu'on aimerait vraiment qu'on a notre œil dessus, puis qu'on fait sûr de la manière dont on rénove reflète ça, puis va nous aider à aller chercher ces certifications-là dans le futur, mais avec parce que les gens pensent comme les buildings écologiques, c'est juste pour les nouvelles constructions. Mais non, on peut amener des vieilles constructions là. On peut faire ça, puis même démocratiser le sustainability, parce que tout le monde voit ça comme juste du monde riche qui puisse faire ça. Ou des grosses entreprises.
You actually get points within LEED certification for reusing building materials. So the windows for us count as points towards LEED certification, and for all of now the heating sources that we put in are all very efficient and so count towards LEED. So we're working towards LEED certification in time, and then the ultimate standard is like living building standards, which is beyond sort of just building materials and building structures, but how healthy is the environment itself for the people that are working within it. So that's kind of the spectrum of certifications.
C'est ça, puis ça va jusqu'au traitement des eaux grises sur place.
Oui, c'est bon qu'il y ait une base sur laquelle vous pouvez vous inspirer.
Absolument, oui. Le LEED, c'est comme la certification la plus connue au monde. Puis le living building, c'est la plus rigoureuse. Donc, c'est ça qu'on veut atteindre, mais c'est ça prend du temps, mais on va y arriver.
Oui, j'en suis certaine, puis je vous encourage. Alors, merci beaucoup encore une fois, puis bravo pour le super beau projet. C'est un exemple, vraiment un bel exemple pour les gens de Moncton pour voir qu'est-ce qu'il y a comme potentiel dans d'autres édifices. Alors, Mylène Després, Dan Gillis, Botsford Station, merci beaucoup.